Subura Dawn, a weaver's awakening. The first light of dawn touches the 7 hills of Rome, and in the crowded streets of the Subura, the city begins to stir. Here, where the working people make their homes, where the air carries the scent of bread, baking, and wool being carded, a woman named Aurelia opens her eyes to another day. She doesn't wake to silence, as the wealthy do in their marble houses on the Palatine. No. She wakes to the sounds of life beginning, the clatter of cartwheels on stone, the call of the water carrier making his rounds, the gentle lowing of oxen being led to market. These sounds don't disturb her sleep. They cradle it, familiar as her own heartbeat. Aurelia stretches beneath her woolen blanket, feeling the cool morning air touch her face. Her small workshop and living space occupy the ground floor of a modest building, its walls shared with Marcus the potter on one side and old Helena, who sells herbs and remedies on the other. Above her, she can hear the footsteps of the cobbler's family as they begin their day. She rises slowly, her bare feet finding the smooth stones of her floor. At 32, Aurelia has learned the rhythm of her body, the way her hands need a moment each morning to remember their strength, the way her back requires a gentle stretch before she can begin the day's work. There's no rushing in the life of a lanifica. Wool teaches you patience, or it teaches you nothing at all. The wooden shutters of her workshop face east, and she opens them now to let in the growing light. The narrow street below is already coming alive. Gaius the baker's apprentice hurries past with a basket of fresh loaves, their crust still steaming in the cool air. 2 women walk by carrying water jars on their hips, their conversation a gentle murmur about children and weather and the price of olive oil. Aurelia breathes in deeply. The morning air carries a dozen scents. The yeasty warmth from the bakery, the green smell of vegetables being unloaded at the market, the earthy scent of the Tiber not far away, and underneath it all, the smell that means home to her, the lanolin sweet scent of wool, the faint smokiness of the brazier where she heats her tools. She turns back to her workshop, her domain. Against one wall stand the baskets that hold her raw wool, some white as clouds, some the natural brown and gray of sheep who've never seen dye. Hanging from wooden pegs are hanks of yarn in colors that make her smile. Deep madder red, bright weld yellow, the blue of woad that reminds her of summer skies. Her loom dominates the center of the space, its wooden frame worn smooth by years of use. It had belonged to her mother, and her mother's mother before that. Sometimes, when the light is just right, Aurelia can see the places where their hands wore grooves in the wood, and she feels them with her, their knowledge flowing through her fingers as she works. But first, before the loom calls to her, there are the morning rituals that ground her day. She kindles a small fire in her brazier, adding dried lavender to the coals. The smoke will keep insects away from her wool, but more than that, the scent centers her, reminds her of the hills outside Rome, where she gathered herbs as a child. She fills a clay bowl with water from the large amphora in the corner and washes her hands and face, the cool water chasing away the last wisps of sleep. From a wooden chest, she takes her breakfast. Bread from yesterday, still good, some soft cheese that Helena traded for a length of woolen cloth, a handful of olives. Simple food, but it tastes of contentment. She eats slowly, watching the street through her open shutters, letting the rhythm of the waking city settle into her bones. A knock at her door frame interrupts her quiet meal. "Aurelia, are you stirring yet?" She smiles at the familiar voice. "Come in, Marcus. I'm just finishing breakfast." The potter steps into her workshop, clay dust already marking his tunic despite the early hour. Marcus is perhaps 40, with strong hands and kind eyes, and a way of moving that speaks of years spent at the wheel. He and Aurelia have been neighbors for 3 years now, and their friendship has grown as naturally as herbs in good soil. "I wanted to catch you before your day truly begins," he says, holding up a small clay cup. "I finished this yesterday and thought you might like it." Aurelia sets down her bread and takes the cup, turning it in her hands. It's beautiful in its simplicity. Cream-colored clay with a glaze that catches the morning light. The rim is perfectly smooth, the handle curved to fit her fingers, as if Marcus had watched her drink and shaped it just for her. "Marcus, it's lovely." She looks up at him, touched by the gift. "But you know I can't afford—" "Who said anything about payment?" His voice is gruff, but his eyes are warm. A craftsman can't appreciate the work of another craftsman. Besides, he gestures toward her loom. "That length of blue cloth you wove last month, I've never seen anything quite like it. The way you caught the light in those threads, it was like looking at water." Aurelia feels warmth spread through her chest. To be seen, truly seen for the skill in her hands. It's a gift beyond price. "Thank you," she says simply, knowing he'll understand all the words she doesn't say. Marcus nods and heads toward the door. "I should let you begin your day. I can hear my wheel calling, and you know how pottery sulks when it's kept waiting." After he leaves, Aurelia holds the cup a moment longer, then fills it with water and drinks. The clay is smooth against her lips, and she thinks about the hours Marcus spent shaping it, the fire that transformed earth into something useful and beautiful. Not so different from her own work, really. Taking raw wool and spinning it, dyeing it, weaving it into cloth that will warm bodies and brighten lives. She finishes her breakfast and begins the day's work in earnest. From one of her baskets, she selects a portion of wool, fleece from sheep that grazed in the hills of Latium, white and clean and full of possibility. She settles onto her low stool and begins to card it, using wooden paddles set with bronze teeth to align the fibers. This is meditative work, requiring attention but not strain. Her hands know the rhythm, gentle strokes that tease the wool into submission without breaking the precious fibers. As she works, her mind wanders, planning the day ahead. She has yarn to spin, thread to dye, and a commission from the wife of a senator. A cloak in deep purple that will require all her skill to achieve the right shade. The street outside grows busier as the morning advances. She hears the familiar voices of her neighbors beginning their work, the ring of hammer on metal from the blacksmith shop, the scrape and thump of Marcus's potter's wheel, the calls of vendors setting up their stalls in the nearby market. This is her world. Not grand or glorious, but real and solid and hers. Here in the Subura, among the working people of Rome, she has found her place. Her hands create beauty from raw materials. Her skill puts food on her table and a roof over her head. She owes no one, answers to no one but herself and the ancient rhythms of her craft. As the sun climbs higher, warming the stones of her workshop floor, Aurelia continues her carding, preparing for another day of the work that feeds her soul. In her hands, ordinary wool becomes extraordinary thread, and in her heart, she carries the quiet satisfaction of a woman who has found her calling. The day stretches ahead, full of possibility and purpose, and she is ready for whatever it might bring. Daily rhythms and lingering shadows. The familiar sounds of the Subura market draw Aurelia from her workshop as the morning light grows stronger. She gathers her worn leather pouch, checking the weight of bronze coins within, and steps into the bustling street. The market calls to her not just for supplies, but for the gentle rhythm of human connection that weaves through her solitary craft. Her bare feet know every uneven stone, every dip and rise in the narrow pathway that leads toward the market square. The scent of baking bread mingles with the earthier smells of livestock and the sharp tang of fermented fish sauce. Children dart between the adults, their laughter bright as copper bells, while merchants call out their wares in voices weathered by years of competition. "Fresh wool from the hills," comes the cry she seeks. Gaius, the wool merchant, stands behind his wooden table, his weathered hands sorting through fleeces of varying quality. His beard, more gray than black now, catches the morning light as he nods in recognition. "Aurelia," he says, his voice warm with genuine fondness, "I saved the best for you, as always." She approaches his stall, running practiced fingers through the offered wool. The fibers speak to her, some coarse and stubborn, others soft as whispered prayers. "From the same flock as last month?" she asks, already knowing the answer from the wool's particular texture. "The very same. Old Lucius treats his sheep better than most Romans treat their slaves." Gaius wraps her selection carefully in rough cloth. His shepherds know their craft. The wool shows it. As she counts out her coins, Aurelia notices a figure lingering near the pottery stall across the narrow aisle. Domitius. Her former master stands with his arms crossed, his dark eyes scanning the crowd with the calculating gaze she remembers too well. Even from this distance, she can see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw works as if chewing on bitter thoughts. Her stomach tightens slightly, not with fear, but with the weary recognition of a shadow that refuses to fade completely. Since gaining her freedom 3 years ago, she has built a life of quiet independence, yet Domitius appears in her world like storm clouds on an otherwise clear day, a reminder of years when her skilled hands belonged to someone else. "He's been asking questions again," Gaius murmurs, following her gaze. His voice drops to barely above a whisper. "About your workshop, about your customers." Aurelia nods, unsurprised but grateful for the warning. "Thank you for telling me." She tucks the wrapped wool into her basket, her movements deliberate and calm. Some men struggle to accept that the world changes around them. "Your freedom was legally earned," Gaius says firmly. "Every citizen in this district knows it." "Legal and accepted are not always the same thing," she replies with a slight smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. "But my work speaks for itself now. That matters more than his wounded pride." She moves through the market with practiced efficiency, stopping at familiar stalls. From the dye merchant, she selects small clay pots of madder root for deep reds and woad for rich blues. The colors will transform her carefully spun threads into something that catches the eye and commands fair prices. At the oil vendor's stall, she chooses a small amphora of olive oil. Not the finest grade for cooking, but the lighter oil that will keep her wool soft and manageable during the spinning process. The vendor, a woman named Claudia with graying hair and knowing eyes, leans close as she measures the oil. "That man has been watching you," she says quietly. "The one by the bread stall now." Aurelia glances over without turning her head fully. Domitius has moved, positioning himself where he can observe her purchases, her interactions. "I see him. Thank you." "My husband could have a word with him," Claudia offers. "Marcus is not a large man, but he has many friends in this district." "Your kindness means more to me than you know," Aurelia says, pressing a small extra coin into Claudia's palm. "But I prefer to handle my own troubles when possible." As she continues through the market, Aurelia feels the familiar weight of being observed. It's not the comfortable awareness of neighbors greeting each other, but something more pointed, more possessive. She understands that in Domitius's mind, her success reflects poorly on his judgment in freeing her. A freed slave should struggle, should remain grateful and dependent. Instead, she thrives. Near the spice merchant's stall, she spots Marcus examining a selection of bronze tools. His usually cheerful demeanor seems subdued today, his shoulders carrying attention she hasn't seen before. When he notices her approach, he straightens with what appears to be effort. "The market is busy today," she observes, settling beside him to examine the tools as well. "Yes, busy." His response lacks his usual warmth. His hands fidget with a small bronze awl, turning it over and over without really seeing it. "Is your work going well?" she asks gently, recognizing the signs of a troubled mind. "I noticed lights in your workshop very late last night." Marcus sets down the awl with more force than necessary. "A commission that refuses to cooperate with my vision," he says. "Sometimes the clay has its own ideas about what it wants to become." Aurelia nods, understanding the frustration of a craftsperson whose materials seem to work against rather than with them. Perhaps it simply needs more time to trust your hands. Perhaps. But his tone suggests the problem runs deeper than difficult clay. She wants to ask more, to offer the same kind of steady friendship he has given her. But Marcus seems to retreat into himself, his attention focused on the tools before him, with unusual intensity. Something troubles him, something beyond the normal challenges of his craft. "I should return to my workshop," she says finally. "But Marcus, if you need someone to listen, you know where to find me." He looks up then, and for a moment his expression softens with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Aurelia. Your friendship it means a great deal." As she turns to leave the market, her basket full of the day's purchases, Aurelia feels the complex currents that flow beneath the surface of daily life. Domitius still watches from his position near the bread stall, his presence a reminder that freedom, once gained, must be continually protected. Marcus carries burdens he hasn't yet chosen to share. Gaius and Claudia offer the quiet support of neighbors who understand the value of community. The walk back to her workshop takes her through the familiar maze of narrow streets and crowded tenements. Children play in doorways while their mothers work at various tasks: mending, cooking, cleaning. The sounds of daily life surround her. The rhythmic pounding of someone beating laundry clean, the scrape of tools on wood, the low murmur of conversations in doorways. Her own workshop appears ahead, its modest doorway promising the return to work that centers her spirit. Inside, her morning's carding awaits completion. The wool she has just purchased will join the growing collection of materials that represent possibility. Threads waiting to be spun, colors waiting to be blended, patterns waiting to emerge under her skilled fingers. But as she crosses the threshold into her sanctuary, Aurelia carries with her the awareness that her peaceful life exists within a larger world of complications. Domitius's watchful presence reminds her that some people view her independence as a threat to the natural order. Marcus's troubles suggest that even friendship cannot shield those she cares about from their own struggles. Yet these shadows do not diminish the satisfaction she finds in her work or the quiet pride she takes in the life she has built with her own hands. If anything, they remind her of how precious her freedom truly is, and how carefully it must be tended, like the delicate threads that will soon flow from her spinning wheel. Secrets in the Clay. That afternoon, as the sun begins its gentle descent toward the western hills, Aurelia decides to walk past Marcus's workshop. She tells herself it's simply to enjoy the cooler air, but truthfully, she hopes to catch a glimpse of him, to see if his earlier melancholy has lifted. His workshop sits quiet, the forge cold. Through the open doorway, she can see his tools arranged with the same careful precision she brings to her own workspace. But Marcus himself is nowhere to be seen. As she turns to leave, something catches her eye near the corner of his building. Scattered fragments of pottery lie half hidden beneath a pile of discarded metal scraps. The pieces are small, unremarkable, except for one shard that seems to catch the light differently than the others. Aurelia glances around, then kneels to examine it more closely. The fragment is no larger than her palm, part of what might once have been a small vessel or lamp, but etched into its surface, so faint she almost misses it, is a symbol she's never seen before. The mark resembles a tree, but not quite. Its branches curve in ways that seem almost deliberate, almost like letters. Around its base, tiny dots form a pattern that makes her think of stars, though she cannot say why. She turns the shard over in her hands, feeling the clay's familiar texture beneath her fingertips. This pottery was made by skilled hands. the clay refined, the firing even, yet the symbol feels ancient, older somehow than the vessel itself. A strange unease settles over her as she studies the marking. It's the same feeling she sometimes gets when walking through the oldest parts of the Subura at twilight, that sense of unseen eyes, of stories buried just beneath the surface of everyday life. She slips the shard into the folds of her stola and continues her walk, but her mind keeps returning to that curious symbol. Where has she seen something like it before? The feeling nags at her like a half-remembered dream. By the time she reaches the small public library near the Forum, Aurelia has convinced herself that a little research might satisfy her curiosity. The library is one of her favorite refuges, a quiet space where she can sit among the scrolls and feel connected to knowledge that spans centuries. The elderly librarian, Gaius, greets her with a warm smile. He's grown accustomed to her visits, understanding that she reads not just for practical knowledge about her trade, but for the simple pleasure of learning. "Something specific today, Aurelia?" he asks, his voice barely above a whisper. She shows him the pottery fragment, explaining where she found it. His weathered face grows thoughtful as he examines the symbol. "Interesting," he murmurs. "This reminds me of some very old texts we have, records from the early days of the Republic. Let me see what I can find." He disappears among the tall shelves, leaving Aurelia alone with her thoughts and the mysterious shard. As she waits, she finds herself thinking about secrets, how they seem to hide in the most ordinary places. In broken pottery, in a friend's troubled expression, in the careful distance she maintains from certain memories of her own past. Her mind drifts, as it sometimes does in quiet moments, to the months before she left Domitius's household. She rarely allows herself to revisit that time, but something about today's discoveries has loosened the careful locks she keeps on those memories. She remembers the way Domitius's wife, Claudia, would watch her with calculating eyes, how conversations would stop when Aurelia entered a room, the strange visitors who came late at night, their voices low and urgent behind closed doors. Most clearly, she remembers the morning she found Claudia burning papers in the courtyard brazier. When Aurelia had offered to help tend the fire, Claudia had snapped at her with unusual sharpness, then caught herself, forcing a smile that never reached her eyes. "Just old household records," Claudia had said. "Nothing that concerns you." But Aurelia had glimpsed enough of the burning documents to see they weren't household accounts. The parchment was too fine, the writing too formal, and for just a moment, before the flames consumed it completely, she thought she saw a symbol in the margin, something that made her think of twisted branches and scattered stars. She had pushed the incident from her mind at the time. Slaves and freedwomen learned early not to see too much, not to ask questions that might bring unwanted attention. But now, holding this pottery fragment, the memory returns with uncomfortable clarity. Gaius reappears carrying a small scroll with evident care. His expression has grown more serious. "This symbol," he begins, then pauses, glancing around to ensure they're alone. It appears in some very old records, references to, let's call them unofficial religious practices, groups that met in secret during the early Republic, when the old ways were giving ground to new beliefs. He unrolls the scroll carefully, revealing faded ink on yellowed parchment. "Here, see this passage? It mentions gatherings of women who preserved certain traditions. They used symbols like this to mark their meeting places, their sacred objects." Aurelia leans closer, studying the ancient text. The writing is formal, official, the kind of record that suggests these gatherings were not entirely welcomed by the authorities. "What happened to them?" she asks. Gaius's expression grows somber. The records suggest they were discouraged, some more forcefully than others. The old ways can be threatening to those who prefer newer forms of power. He rolls the scroll carefully, his movements deliberate and respectful. Of course, this is all ancient history, surely nothing that concerns our present day. But something in his tone suggests he's not entirely certain of that. And Aurelia finds herself thinking of Marcus's troubled expression, of Domitius's calculating gaze at the market, of her own carefully guarded independence. She thanks Gaius and makes her way home as the afternoon light begins to soften toward evening. The pottery shard feels heavier in her hand now, weighted with possibility and questions she's not sure she wants answered. Back in her workshop, she sets the fragment on her workbench and lights her oil lamp against the gathering dusk. The symbol seems to shift in the flickering light, its carved lines dancing with shadows. She thinks about the women Gaius described, women who met in secret to preserve something precious, something threatened, women who marked their sacred objects with symbols that spoke of growth and connection, of roots that ran deeper than the surface world could see. The parallel to her own life is not lost on her. Her workshop, her independence, her careful cultivation of freedom. These too are precious things that must be protected, tended with the same care she brings to her finest threads. As she prepares her evening meal, Aurelia finds herself listening more carefully to the sounds of the neighborhood around her. Footsteps in the street, voices from nearby windows, the distant clatter of Marcus's tools as he works late into the evening. Everything seems ordinary, familiar, yet somehow changed by the day's discoveries, as if she's been looking at the surface of a pool only to realize there are depths beneath that she never suspected. The pottery fragment sits on her workbench like a question waiting for an answer, and despite her growing unease, Aurelia knows she cannot simply ignore what she's learned today. Some secrets once glimpsed refuse to remain hidden. Whispers in the dark. That night, sleep comes fitfully to Aurelia. She finds herself stirring at every small sound. The settling of wooden beams, the distant call of the night watch, the soft scurrying of mice in the walls. Each time she drifts toward rest, something pulls her back to wakefulness, as if her mind refuses to let go of the day's unsettling discoveries. When morning finally arrives, she moves through her usual rituals with less certainty than before. The wool feels different beneath her fingers, heavier somehow, as though it carries the weight of all the questions she cannot answer. She finds herself glancing repeatedly toward the pottery fragment, its strange symbols seeming to shift and change in the early light filtering through her window. The feeling follows her as she steps outside. The familiar streets of the Subura stretch before her, filled with the usual morning bustle. Vendors calling their wares, children darting between the stalls, the steady rhythm of daily life. Yet something feels displaced, as if she's seeing it all through new eyes, eyes that now know to look for what might be hidden beneath the surface. She becomes aware of it gradually, the sensation of being observed, not the casual glances of neighbors and passers-by, but something more deliberate, more focused. At first, she tells herself it's merely her imagination, her mind conjuring phantoms from yesterday's discoveries. But the feeling persists, following her like a shadow she cannot shake. When she pauses at a fabric stall, pretending to examine a bolt of deep blue wool, she catches a glimpse of movement in her peripheral vision, a figure in a dark cloak, standing too still among the flowing crowd. When she turns to look directly, there's nothing there, only the usual mix of shoppers and merchants going about their business. The unease grows stronger as the day progresses. Twice more she notices the same dark figure, once reflected in the polished surface of a bronze mirror at a merchant's stall, and again as a fleeting shadow disappearing around a corner just as she turns to look. Each time she's left questioning what she actually saw, wondering if her mind is playing tricks born of too little sleep and too many troubling thoughts. It's as she's making her way back toward her workshop that she encounters Domitius again. This time, there's nothing accidental about their meeting. He's waiting for her, standing directly in her path with that calculating smile she remembers too well from her years in his household. "Aurelia," he says, his voice carrying that familiar tone of false warmth. "How fortuitous to see you again so soon. I was just thinking about our conversation yesterday, about how well you seem to be managing your independence." There's something in the way he says the word that makes her skin crawl, as if independence itself is somehow suspect, something that needs to be watched and contained. "Good morning, Domitius," she replies carefully, keeping her voice level despite the rapid beating of her heart. "I'm afraid I'm rather busy today." Of course," he says, not moving aside. "A woman of business now. How admirable. Though I do hope you're being careful about the company you keep. The Subura can be unpredictable, full of influences that might not have your best interests at heart." His eyes seem to search her face as he speaks, as if looking for some reaction, some sign of guilt or knowledge. The words themselves sound like concern, but underneath she hears something else entirely. A warning, a threat wrapped in the guise of neighborly care. "I appreciate your concern," she manages, "but I assure you I'm quite capable of managing my own affairs." "Oh, I'm certain you are," he says smoothly. "It's just that, well, there are always those who would take advantage of a woman's curiosity. People who might fill her head with stories, ideas that could prove dangerous to her well-being." The way he emphasizes certain words makes her blood run cold. Stories, ideas, as if he knows exactly what she discovered yesterday, what questions have been keeping her awake at night. But how could he possibly? "I'm not sure what you mean," she says, though even as the words leave her lips, she knows he can hear the uncertainty in her voice. "Don't you?" His smile grows wider, but there's no warmth in it now. "The Subura is a small place, Aurelia. Word travels quickly here, especially about unusual interests, ancient symbols, old stories that some people think are better left buried." Her breath catches in her throat. He does know. Somehow he knows about the pottery fragment, about her visit to the library, about everything she learned yesterday. But how? And more importantly, why does he care? "I think there's been some misunderstanding," she begins, but he cuts her off with a gentle gesture that somehow feels more threatening than any harsh word. "No misunderstanding at all," he says quietly. "Simply a friend offering advice. You see, some knowledge comes with responsibilities, obligations, and not everyone who seeks such knowledge is prepared for what those obligations might require." He steps closer, and she catches the scent of expensive oils, the mark of wealth and influence that she remembers from her years of servitude. "I would hate to see you become involved in something beyond your understanding, something that might compromise the peaceful life you've worked so hard to build." The threat is clear now, no longer hidden behind false concern. Her peaceful life, the workshop, her hard-won independence, all of it could be taken away, and they both know it. In Rome, a former slave's freedom is always precarious, always dependent on the goodwill of those with power. "I understand," she whispers, hating herself for the fear she hears in her own voice. "I knew you would," he says, his smile returning to its earlier false warmth. "You were always such a sensible girl. I'm sure we won't need to discuss this again." He steps aside then, allowing her to pass, but she can feel his eyes following her as she hurries away. The sensation of being watched has taken on a new dimension now. No longer the vague unease of imagination, but the very real knowledge that someone is tracking her movements, monitoring her choices. Back in her workshop, she stares at the pottery fragment with new understanding. Whatever secret it represents, Whatever ancient story it tells, there are those who will go to great lengths to keep it buried. The question that haunts her now is whether she has the courage to uncover the truth, or if the price of knowledge is higher than she's prepared to pay. The shadows seem deeper now, full of watching eyes and whispered threats, and Aurelia realizes that her simple, peaceful life may already be a thing of the past. The Tablet's Tale. 3 days pass before Aurelia finds the courage to return to the place where she discovered the pottery fragment. The morning air carries the scent of fresh bread and wood smoke as she makes her way through the narrow streets, her footsteps echoing softly against the worn stone. She tells herself she's simply taking a different route to the market, but her heart knows the truth. The broken amphora still lies where she first noticed it, half buried beneath a pile of discarded roof tiles behind Marcus's workshop. In daylight, it looks ordinary enough, just another piece of pottery in a city full of clay vessels. But something draws her closer, some instinct she can't quite name. Kneeling beside the fragments, she begins to carefully move aside the larger pieces. Her fingers, skilled from years of working with delicate wool fibers, probe gently through the debris. The morning sun slants across the alley, casting long shadows that seem to dance and shift as she works. Then she feels it. Something smooth and flat, different from the curved pottery shards. Her breath catches as she carefully extracts a small clay tablet, no larger than her palm. Unlike the rough pottery around it, this piece has been deliberately shaped and fired, and covering its surface, strange markings that make her pulse quicken. These aren't the familiar Latin letters she's learned to read. These marks are older, much older. Tiny wedge-shaped impressions pressed into the clay with careful precision. Cuneiform writing, though she doesn't yet know the name for it. The tablet feels warm in her hands, as if it's been waiting centuries for someone to find it. Aurelia wraps the tablet carefully in a piece of soft cloth and hurries home. In the safety of her workshop, she examines it more closely. The markings are clear and deliberate, arranged in neat rows across the surface. Whatever message this contains, it was important enough for someone to preserve it in this permanent form and to hide it where only chance might reveal it again. She thinks of the scholar at the library, the elderly man who helped her research the pottery symbol. His name is Gaius Flavius, and his eyes had lit up with genuine curiosity when she'd shown him the fragment. Perhaps he might know someone who could read these ancient marks. The next morning finds her once again climbing the steps to the library, the tablet hidden safely in her market basket beneath a layer of wool samples. Gaius Flavius greets her with a warm smile, his weathered hands already reaching for the scroll he'd been studying. "Ah, the young wool worker with the mysterious pottery," he says, his voice carrying the gentle authority of years spent among books and scrolls. "Have you discovered anything more about your symbol?" Aurelia glances around the quiet reading room, ensuring they're alone before carefully unwrapping the tablet. "I found this," she whispers, placing it on the wooden table between them, hidden with the pottery fragment. The scholar's reaction is immediate and profound. His face grows pale as he leans forward, his eyes widening with recognition, and something that might be fear. His hands hover over the tablet without quite touching it, as if it might burn his fingers. "Where exactly did you find this?" His voice has dropped to barely a whisper. "Behind the potter's workshop in the Subura. It was hidden inside a broken amphora." Aurelia watches his face carefully, noting the way his jaw tightens, the quick glance he casts toward the library entrance. Gaius is quiet for a long moment, his scholarly composure clearly shaken. Finally, he speaks, his words measured and careful. "This is very old, older than Rome itself. And if I'm reading these marks correctly..." He pauses, running a trembling finger through the air above the tablet's surface. "This isn't just ancient writing. This is a record, a witness statement, you might say. A witness to what? To a crime, a murder, to be precise. And the name mentioned here. He stops abruptly, his face growing even paler. My dear, I think you should return this to where you found it, immediately. But Aurelia has come too far to turn back now. What name? What does it say? The scholar glances around once more, then leans closer. It speaks of a man who arranged the death of a rival merchant family 20 years ago, a fire that was blamed on an overturned oil lamp but was actually deliberate murder. And the man it names, his voice drops to barely a breath, is Lucius Domitius. The words hit Aurelia like a physical blow. Domitius, her former master, the man who has been watching her, threatening her, trying to control her even after she gained her freedom. The pieces begin to fall into place with terrifying clarity. The merchant family, she manages to ask, though her throat feels tight. What was their name? Cassius. They were successful pottery merchants, had workshops throughout the city. Gaius's eyes meet hers with growing understanding, including, if I remember correctly, the workshop that now belongs to your friend Marcus. The world seems to tilt around Aurelia. Marcus's workshop, built on the site where a family was murdered, and Domitius, her former master, was responsible. No wonder he's been so determined to silence her research. This tablet doesn't just contain ancient history, it contains evidence of his crimes. Who wrote this? She whispers. Who was the witness? Gaius studies the markings more carefully, his scholarly training overcoming his fear. A woman, a servant in the Cassius household who escaped the fire. She must have known how to write in the old script. Perhaps she was from one of the eastern provinces, where such knowledge was more common among women. A servant. A woman whose testimony would have been worthless in a Roman court, but who found a way to preserve the truth nonetheless. Aurelia feels a strange kinship with this unknown woman across the centuries. Another person who understood that sometimes the only way to speak truth is to hide it and hope that someday someone will listen. What happened to her? The witness? I don't know. But if Domitius discovered what she knew, Gaius doesn't need to finish the sentence. They both understand the implications. The scholar carefully wraps the tablet again, his movements deliberate and gentle. You must decide what to do with this knowledge, but understand, if Domitius learns that you found this evidence, your life will be in very real danger. As Aurelia walks home through the busy streets, the tablet seems to burn against her side like a coal. She carries not just a piece of clay, but the voice of a murdered family, and the secret that could destroy the man who has already threatened her freedom. The question now is whether she has the strength to give voice to the voiceless, knowing it might cost her everything she's worked so hard to build. Gathering storm. The dawn that follows brings no comfort, only the weight of terrible knowledge and the sound of voices rising from the streets below. Aurelia sits by her window, the clay tablet wrapped carefully in linen beside her, listening to the merchants and laborers as they begin their day with hushed conversations that carry an edge of fear. Did you hear what happened in the palace? A woman's voice drifts upward. They say the emperor spent all night singing while the senators waited in the antechamber. Madness, comes the reply. Pure madness, and we're the ones who'll pay for it. The words settle into Aurelia's chest like stones. She has lived through enough upheaval to recognize the signs. The way people's voices change when they speak of their rulers, the careful glances over shoulders, the sudden silences when strangers approach. Rome feels different now, unstable, like a pot with hairline cracks that might shatter at the slightest touch. She thinks of Marcus, of the worry that has lived in his eyes these past weeks, Perhaps his unease was never just about his work. Perhaps he, too, has felt the tremors running beneath the city's foundations. When she finally makes her way to his workshop, she finds him standing motionless before his wheel, his hands covered in clay, but his attention somewhere far away. The morning light filtering through his doorway seems dimmer somehow, as if even the sun hesitates to fully illuminate this corner of the Subura. "Marcus," she says softly, and he startles, his eyes focusing on her with visible effort. "Aurelia." His voice carries relief, but also something deeper, a weariness that seems to have aged him overnight. "I was hoping you would come." She steps closer, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his gaze keeps drifting toward the street. The city feels different today. He nods slowly, wiping his hands on a cloth with deliberate movements. There are rumors everywhere. Some say Nero plans to rebuild half of Rome to suit his architectural fantasies. Others whisper of plots against him, of senators meeting in secret. He pauses, his voice dropping lower, and there are those who say he's lost his mind entirely. The weight of the tablet in her satchel seems to grow heavier. Here they are, discussing the madness of emperors, while she carries evidence of a different kind of corruption, one that touches their lives directly. What does this mean for people like us? "I don't know." Marcus sets down his tools, turning to face her fully. "But I know that when the powerful grow unstable, it's always the powerless who suffer first." His eyes search her face. "Aurelia, there's something I need to tell you about Domitius." Her heart quickens, but she keeps her expression calm. "What about him?" "Yesterday, after you left the market, he came here." Marcus's voice is barely above a whisper now. He was asking questions about you, about what you've been researching, about whether I've seen you with any unusual objects. The morning air suddenly feels thin. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing, but—" Marcus runs a hand through his hair, leaving streaks of clay. "He made it clear that he's watching you, watching both of us. And with everything that's happening in the city, with all this uncertainty, I'm afraid of what he might do." Aurelia feels the familiar tightness in her chest, the same sensation she remembers from her years in Domitius's household. The feeling of being trapped, of having her freedom exist only at someone else's sufferance. But this time is different. This time she holds knowledge that could change everything. "Marcus," she says carefully, "what if I told you there was a way to stop him, to ensure he could never threaten either of us again?" His eyebrows draw together. "What do you mean?" She glances toward the street, checking for watching eyes, then moves closer. "The tablet I found, the one with the ancient writing, it contains more than just old stories." As she tells him about the scholar's translation, about the evidence of murder and theft, she watches his face change, first disbelief, then understanding, then a kind of grim resignation. "So this workshop," he says slowly, looking around at the familiar walls, the tools, the half-finished pieces, all of it built on blood. "Yes." The word hangs between them like a bridge they must decide whether to cross. Marcus is quiet for a long time, his potter's hands turning over and over as if shaping invisible clay. When he speaks again, his voice is steady but tired. "What you're suggesting, exposing him, it would be dangerous even in peaceful times. But now, with the city on edge, with everyone looking for scapegoats—" "I know." Aurelia feels the truth of it in her bones. But those people, that family, they deserve justice. And if we don't act, who will? And if Domitius destroys us both in the process, if he uses his connections, his wealth, his influence to paint us as criminals or conspirators? Marcus's voice carries no accusation, only the weight of hard realities. "You've worked so hard to build your independence, Aurelia. Is this worth risking it all?" The question she has been avoiding finally stands before her, unavoidable as sunrise. Around them, the sounds of the city continue. The calls of vendors, the rumble of carts, the ordinary rhythms of life that feel suddenly precious and fragile. Sometimes I think about leaving, she admits quietly, taking what little I have and going somewhere far from Rome, far from all of this, starting over where no one knows my history, where Domitius's shadow can't reach. Marcus nods slowly. I've had the same thoughts, especially lately, with everything feeling so uncertain. They stand together in the growing morning light, two people caught between the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future. Outside, Rome continues its restless dance between glory and corruption, between the powerful and the powerless, between truth and the comfortable lies that keep the world turning. The clay tablet rests silent in Aurelia's satchel, holding its ancient accusations, waiting for someone brave enough to give voice to the voiceless, or wise enough to know when silence might be the only path to survival. Subura at peace. But in this moment, as the evening light filters through her workshop window, Aurelia chooses the ancient wisdom of her hands, the rhythm of the loom, the simple act of creating something beautiful from threads that once seemed separate and meaningless. She settles before her work, fingers finding their familiar dance across the warp and weft. The wool is soft tonight, dyed in shades of deep blue and gentle gold, colors that remind her of dawn breaking over the 7 hills. Each pass of the shuttle carries away a little of the day's weight. Each gentle pull of the thread draws her deeper into the meditative space where only the work exists. The sounds of the Subura begin to soften around her. Children's laughter from the courtyard below grows distant and dreamlike. The calls of merchants closing their stalls fade into a gentle murmur. Even the ever-present rumble of cartwheels on stone becomes a lullaby, a reminder that life continues its eternal rhythm regardless of the storms that rage in palaces or the secrets buried in clay tablets. Her fingers move with the certainty of years, pulling each thread into place with a tenderness born of practice and patience. This is what her mother taught her. This is what her grandmother's grandmother knew, that in the simple act of weaving, a woman connects herself to every woman who has ever sat before a loom and found peace in the crossing of threads. The blue wool catches the lamplight, shimmering like water, like the Tiber at sunset, like the dreams that flow between sleeping and waking. The gold threads wind through like memories of better days, like promises of mornings yet to come, like the small acts of kindness that Marcus showed her when he brought that clay cup to her door. Aurelia's breathing slows to match the rhythm of her work. In, and the shuttle passes left to right. Out, and her fingers adjust the tension. In, and another row takes shape. Out, and the pattern emerges from what seemed like chaos only moments before. She thinks of all the women who have sat as she sits now, in workshops and homes across the empire, their hands moving in this same ancient dance, their hearts finding the same quiet refuge in work that serves and soothes and creates beauty where there was none before. They are her true sisterhood, not the mysterious women whose symbols she discovered in pottery fragments, but the countless ordinary women who rise each day and choose to make something lovely with their hands. The tablet in her satchel seems lighter now, less urgent, as if the simple act of weaving has reminded her that some truths can wait, that justice moves on its own timeline, that survival and dignity can coexist with patience and wisdom. Outside her window, the Subura settles into its evening rhythms. Families gather around small tables for simple meals. Neighbors call gentle greetings across narrow streets. Oil lamps flicker to life in windows like earthbound stars, each one marking a place where ordinary people choose hope over despair, community over isolation. the small daily acts of love over the grand gestures of power. Aurelia's loom clicks softly in the gathering dusk, adding its voice to the symphony of a neighborhood at peace with itself. Her hands move with the confidence of a woman who has found her place in the world, who knows that freedom is not the absence of danger but the presence of choice, who understands that strength is not the ability to fight every battle, but the wisdom to choose which battles serve life and which serve only pride. The wool flows through her fingers like water, like time, like the gentle current that carries all things toward their proper destination. And in this moment, surrounded by the soft sounds of her community settling into sleep, Aurelia weaves herself into the great tapestry of women who've always known that the most revolutionary act is simply to continue, to create, to love, to choose peace when the world offers endless reasons for war, to trust that tomorrow's light will find her hands still moving in their ancient dance of making beauty from the simple threads of an ordinary life.